The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome to Legislative Update. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking with Assemblyman John McDonald of the 108th Assembly District, which includes Albany, parts of Albany, Cohoes, Green Island, North Greenbush, Rensselaer, Troy, Waterford, and Waterville. He's finishing his third term now, so welcome. Thanks for coming.
Joe, it's good to be here.
I just wanted to ask you before we started about this session and this year's budget. This is your third term. You're not the new guy anymore. You're not the rookie. What have you? What's it been like now that you've sort of got your legs in the
it's
assembly?
Interesting. Interesting enough. When you're the mayor, you're kind of like the point person. You're in charge. You create your own agenda, and you hopefully implement your agenda. When you're in the legislature, it's a whole different ballgame. The governor actually sets an agenda with the state of the state and with the budget. The legislature responds to the governor's budget, and the budget itself, $168 billion in spending, has a lot of moving parts to it. And I will say this, the nice part being year six budgets, it's a little bit easier now to digest it and move through it than it was the first year. First year was quite overwhelming, to be absolutely honest with you. But we have a much better handle of what to look for. And the acronyms become much more familiar. As you know, every profession, every business has its own little cadre of acronyms to go by, and government is no shortage of that by any stretch of the imagination.
So I should tell people, you mentioned you were also mayor of Cohoes before, Assemblyman.
Yeah.
13 years. There must be some similarities, though, between being a mayor of a city the size of Cohoes and being,
Well, there is and there isn't. Once again, in the legislature, particularly in the assembly, you're one of 150, and you're one of a larger caucus of 100, a large caucus of about 100 members. So you have to work together as a team. The same token, when I was mayor, I always try to work together as a team, even though the executive and the legislative entities were the checks and balances. So it's different in some aspects because a lot of times you have to vote on things that you really have no interest in. But at the end of the day, there is one common denominator. And the common denominator is you're elected by the people to represent them and to serve them. And that's something that I don't take lightly by any stretch of the imagination, and try to be as responsive and hopeful as possible.
Well, I should say that besides what you were just mentioning, that Assemblyman McDonald he's a member of 6 committees, and he's the chair of a subcommittee on effective treatment. I won't read all the other ones, but the one that you're chair of, what is that committee?
Well, that's a subcommittee of the Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Committee, which obviously, being the only practicing healthcare professional and happen to be a pharmacist who actually knows how drugs, both legally and illegally, how they work, it's an appropriate committee for me to be a part of and to be a chair of, particularly as this burgeoning opioid crisis continues to grow.
Have your colleagues come to you with a lot of
colleagues,
questions?
Any pharmacy-related item, any healthcare-related item, my colleagues reach out quite regularly. To really, more of like, hey, here's what I'm working on. What do you think? Hey, here's what's going on. I really don't like it. How can you help defeat it? It kind of goes back and forth.
And would you get questions from your colleagues from both sides of the aisle?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Just yesterday, we were in session on a couple different things, not opioid related, but pharmacy related, and literally what the members come up to say, hey, listen, this group is into talking about this. What are your thoughts? And that's great that they do that.
Yeah. So what you mentioned.
And by the way, it's not only just within the assembly, it's also with the other house in the Senate.
You mean you get questions from senators?
Absolutely. I mean, that's how we get things done.
When you said you're the only assembly person working in the healthcare field as a pharmacist, does that include the Senate also?
That includes the Senate too, yeah.
So why do you, before we go on, I just wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? There's no more.
Well, there's a couple different things. I actually still practice pharmacy. I own a pharmacy. as you might know. And therefore, I'm very lucky in that aspect. I get to actually create my own hours. There's many of them, but I create a lot of them. In that same token, government is not easy. You really have to have that ability to spend a lot of time with people and have a lot of patience. And unfortunately, what's happening in medicine, for example, with doctors, a lot of their practices are being bought out. They're becoming corporatized. They may not have an employer that is going to be willing to give them that latitude to come and go, because the legislature has a very funny schedule. Most people don't really recognize it, and most people don't really want to understand it either. You know, it's broken up into really what I call 3 segments. So from January through the end of June is the legislative session, when bills are passed. But you break that down into Part A, which is beginning of January to the end of March, which is the budget, and it's mostly about somehow getting this $168 billion colossal document approved, and trying to figure out who wins and who loses. Hopefully the public wins in all aspects. And then from April to the end of June, we focus on non-fiscally related items, more about policy.
Is that when you
items.
would have hearings with all these committees?
We have hearings actually throughout the course of the year, but the hearings usually are helpful in regards to developing the policy. And then from July to the end of the year, it's non-legislative time, which is time to spend back in your district. Now, I'm lucky. I'm back in my district every day because my office is across the street from my district. And that's when the people say, well, you must be on vacation for those 6 months.
Well, that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
What does an assemblyman do when they're not in session?
Yeah.
Because I know it's a full-time.
Well, there's a lot of different things they do. And, it's funny, for many people it's a full-time job, for other people it's a part-time job. I try to put full-time into everything I do, but I have long days. I have 14, 15-hour days every day of the week, and I enjoy doing that. I have a very patient wife and children. But during the non-legislative time, we deal primarily with constituent issues. You look at my district, it's 5 cities that you mentioned earlier, very urban in nature, a lot of needs, a lot of what I call kitchen table issues, people worried about housing and education and affordability of college and jobs and employment and giving opportunity, particularly in the minority communities. So spend an awful lot of time meeting with constituents, trying to work through the machinations of the state's policy. It's challenging.
Do they write you or email you, or they just come in the farmers and say, hey, what
Yes, all of the above. A lot of emails, texts, phone calls. You stop at Stewart's in the south end of Albany, get a cup of coffee, and someone say, hey, listen, I need a job, or I need help finding housing, and NYMO shut off my power. And they do. They walk into the pharmacy and we'll just say, can I talk to you for a couple minutes?
Yeah,
That's fine.
And so do you like that part of the
I love engaging with the public.
Okay.
Whenever, and that's the interesting part. I mean, when I look back on that, this is my 19th year in public office, there are some great physical things you can point to and say, I did that, or I was a part of that. Mm-hmm. Mostly I was a part of it, not that I did that. But what really is the most meaningful part of the job is when you can help somebody advance themselves one step. And it doesn't need to be captured on film. It doesn't need to be chronicled in the paper. It doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It's basically that personal satisfaction that you help somebody, no matter how big or how small the feat was.
Okay. And then your district, besides the 5 cities I mentioned, what's the population of that your district about?
So the assembly districts are about 131,000 residents overall.
Oh, okay.
Senate districts, just for those who are interested, are about 315,000 residents.
All right, so it goes by population.
It goes by population.
Okay.
So you run the math backwards, the state of New York's about 19.8 million people. Divided by 150, you get 131,000, give or take, plus or minus. And in the Senate, there's only 63 members. So that's about 315,000.
So now that the budget has passed and your phase 1 is over, we're in phase 2 now, like you said.
Yeah.
Can you tell us maybe some of the highlights of not only the budget overall for the state, but maybe some of the highlights for the capital district?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with the capital city itself, City of Albany. Both Pat Fahey and I share representation, City of Albany, and working with Neil Breslin and working with the governor and Mayor Sheehan, we were able to again bring additional. It's really, last year was the first year, this is the second year, $12 million with no restrictions per se of funding to the state capital budget for the city of Albany. City of Albany, when you compare it to other large cities throughout New York State, is severely, it's almost punished for lack of municipal aid compared to its other peers. So we've been fighting with the mayor to make sure that they've gotten their fair share. Came up just a tad bit short. We're hoping for 12 and a half, got $12 million, but as many other municipalities know, it was a lot more than what everybody else got, which was nothing in regards to additional aid. So that was a big thing. Education budget was successful once again, just south of an additional $1 billion in increased aid for education throughout New York State. Has played a very large role for many of these districts who are still going through some challenging times with the tax cap, which limits their ability to raise funding. And they still, at the same time, want to provide the best program for our children. So that was very important. And another area that I think was very critical was in regards to higher education. Last year was the beginning of the Excelsior Program, which provides free college tuition to those children that live in families that make less than $100,000 per year. Now the threshold's been increased to $110,000 per year. But at the same token, one of the things that I've really focused on is let's not forget the private colleges. And when I say that, I think particularly what I call the 3 S's here in the capital region: Siena, St. Rose, and Sage. Mid-level colleges that really do their best to make sure that opportunity programs are extended to all young men and young women, particularly those of urban populations or low-income needs. And that was kind of lost the first year of the Excelsior Scholars. It was all about public education. We reinforced the public education component, but also provided additional funding to help provide additional support, particularly for minority communities, to have access to private colleges.
Was Excelsior originally only for the
only
SUNY
public?
schools?
It's still only for SUNY, but we've been able to make some enhancements on the private side to help there as well.
So do you foresee in the future perhaps that expanding to?
I don't know if Excelsior will expand to private colleges, but I think we'll find a way to provide additional financial support, particularly for those who are in low-income communities.
Okay. Now, do you know how the Excelsior, how many kids have taken advantage?
I don't have.
I know some have been only been on a year.
It's oversubscribed. I'll say
oversubscribed.
That. Yeah. and that was with a very short window. So I think this next year will be a very big test. But at the same token, I'm talking to Siena and St. Rose and Sage. Their enrollments have been very steady. They're up in some circumstances. So the initial fear that Excelsior might pull from one pool to the other is not holding up at this stage of the game, but we'll see what this next cycle is, which is, as you know, it's becoming decision day pretty soon for a lot of students.
And I noticed that you also, besides all these other things, I have all the stuff here you do, but you also have a blog on the Times-Union. You recently wrote about, I don't know if I get the name right, it was called Restore New York, how money's helped some of the can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
it's a program actually that I remember back in 2004, 2005 when I was mayor co-host. My neighbor and my predecessor, Ron Casteri, member of the Assembly and Majority Leader of the Assembly, invited me down to testify in front of an Assembly subcommittee about the challenges with urban areas. Cities have a lot of old buildings, some that could be beautifully restored, some that need to go. And we talked very candidly about the fact that we need money for demolition or rehabilitation. And since I've been in the Assembly for the last 6 years, we've been able to, in the last 4 out of 6 years, successfully fund a program that was started in 2004 when Ron was there, called Restore. It went off the radar screen in 2009, 2010 when the state's finances were challenging. But basically it allows municipalities to apply for particular projects to bring historic buildings to a new life and repurposing. The one that I think I talked about particularly was in the north end of Albany, right across the street from Ida Yarborough Apartments. Capital Rep is now going into a former electrician's building, the Gomez building, and that's where Capital Rep's going to call a new home. Over $1 million to go there, another $1 million to go into downtown Troy, to one of their historic sites that'll bring a new residential purpose. And I mean, Troy is on fire right now.
I was just going to say, I am from Troy, and Troy seems to be having a real renaissance.
They are basically picking up where Saratoga was leaving off, and Saratoga continues to do well, but Troy is going through a very unique revitalization.
Well, I would say as someone from Troy, Troy's always having comebacks, but this one seems seems real.
This one has legs. This one has legs, that's for sure.
And what I was going to say about is the Restore New York going?
It's going to be continued. We funded it again,
Okay.
which is good. It gives as a former executive, gives us the opportunity to say, listen, we want to get that project done. It's going to be a change maker in the community.
And then when you look at your district, when you talk about revitalizing older, you have some of the oldest cities in the state.
And it works out well in some aspects. One of the major victories in this state budget that has not been discussed too much is the fact that we made some changes to the historic preservation tax credit, which has truly been an economic engine for upstate New York. Over $900 million of investment in the last 3 years throughout upstate New York. Governor just was recently touting it. We extended that program for another 5 years.
And that is, could you explain?
And basically what it does, it marries up to the federal tax credit. So if you invest in a building, you're eligible to 20% return in tax credits for your investment.
Does it have to be historic?
It has to be historic property. It has to be signed off by the appropriate agencies at the state, which is important because we want to make sure that the character of the buildings is kept intact. What I like about it is it's not a grant where you say, hey, go out and try and do this.
Yeah.
This is basically saying this is a credit for something you've done.
Okay.
It's really recognizing an investment. And the nice part is, there were some changes. The feds, under the current administration, was threatening to extinguish the program, which would have been devastating, not only to New York State, but many other states up and down the coastlines. They continued it, however, they made a provision where that credit would not be paid up in the first year, it would be paid out over a 5-year period. Developers, it doesn't help them. In their pro forma, these projects are so tight to get them done because you got to remember something, when you're doing historic preservation, you're trying to apply today's building code to something from 150 years ago. And by the way, when you start pulling off some sheetrock and finding out what's underneath those walls, you got a lot of surprises. When you're in a greenfield, you're building a new building, it's pretty straightforward what you're going to do. Historic preservation, and we did over 700,000 square feet of revitalization at the Harmony Mills in Cohoes. I was very much, that project, I shepherded that from 2001 through 2012.
That's apartments now, right?
It's beautiful. Over 450 loft apartments. They're absolutely state-of-the-art, beautiful. First set of loft apartments in upstate New York, in the capital regions, put it that way. And they're very much an unbridled success. And quite honestly, during my tenure as mayor, during the 13 years, we built over 2,000 new residential units because, from my perspective, your sales tax revenue, which is your largest revenue outside of property taxes, is derived by one thing and one thing only: how many people live in your community.
Okay.
And we were able to, with those 2,000 units, change the direction of Cohoes since 1930. Since 1930, we were at an all-time high of 27,000 residents, and it kept going down until 2000 to 15,000. And in that one decade, it jumped up to over 16,500. So we reversed the trend. We're getting more sales tax revenue for the city, which is good. And by the way, we're attracting more people to live in the community.
And I think hopefully Troy, their population will be increased.
Troy's population is on the uptick.
Yes.
They are becoming, as they call it Little Brooklyn now.
I know.
And the reason why is because in Brooklyn and Manhattan, and I talked to my colleagues about it, a lot of individuals are being pushed out because the cost of living, the revitalization going on, has made those areas unaffordable. It's affordable in Troy.
I mean, I would never. A really good friend of mine's daughter works at Capital Roots.
Oh, love it.
And she's in her 20s, and she's saying, well, she spends her weekends. She goes out in Troy every weekend. I'm thinking, she's going out to Troy, but so it's definitely
a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars, a lot of activities, a lot of culture. That's good. So we're speaking today. It's April 25th.
Is the end of session, is it still like a big rush near the end, or is this, what have you found? Your third time going through
the politics is a little bit different this year because of what's going on with the Senate, but overall, there will be a rush. We always have certain bills that are important to particular individuals or groups that we have to get done. I'm still trying to push on some priorities in regards to the opioid epidemic in regards to some local government initiatives, and trying to also push across the goal lines some bills to help small business. Far too often, many businesses, all of a sudden a notice shows up saying you're in violation, pay $1,000. They didn't even know what happened. They didn't even know the rule was in effect. And I'm trying to push legislation to that effect to say, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with encouraging compliance, but let's do it appropriately.
Now, are these bills that you have sponsored, wrote?
I've written, my staff,
Okay.
my staff does the writing. I know.
Well, you know, I know.
I have the
Most
nugget.
people know that.
I have the nugget, but you leave it to the professionals to do the writing, right? And, you know, it's something that, yes, I'm the lead sponsor. That's the ones that I'm pushing for, and I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to get these bills across the goal line.
Now, when you were mayor of Cohoes, I know you were also, for, I don't know how many years you were the chairman of, like, what was it, the State Mayors Association?
I was president of the New York State Conference of Mayors.
Of all the mayors. Now that you're in the assembly, do some of those guys still come from other parts of the state and talk to you? And
Every day.
every day.
Every
Now,
day.
what are what's the same kind of concerns of?
Yeah, you know, we'll be meeting tomorrow with the Conference of Mayors again on a new initiative to deal with how local government can be more involved with what's called receivership of abandoned properties. A lot of times, property owners will just vacate a property and leave them behind, and that's fine if no one's living in there because we're working on that process. But the other real bad situation is when they leave behind a property and there's people living there and they don't know who to report to. They have no idea what their future is going to be, and the local government is finding a way to jump in and be an intermediary until the property can move to responsible hands.
Okay.
But does it happen every day? It does throughout New York State. Maybe it hasn't happened too much in the capital region, but it does happen.
All right, so while we're going to finish up here, again, you're ending your third term as being an assemblyman. Has it sort of become what you thought it was going to be, or do you think it was going to be something different? Or?
No, you know, it's interesting. My team that I work with on a daily basis, we were talking about this about 4 or 5 months ago. I think we found our spot. We found out where we're supposed to be, and I try to focus on what I call kitchen table issues, the things that families talk about at nighttime. And they talk about taxes, they talk about higher education, they talk about health care, they talk about small business. That's my background. That's what I do. I'm one of
And
only,
healthcare too.
I'm one of only 4 mayors in both houses of the legislature. I'm one of only a handful of business owners in the legislature, and I'm the only practicing healthcare professional. So I focus on what I know and just try to stay out of the way of the
What
things that I
did all
shouldn't.
these other ones do? They're not all lawyers, are they? Or-
No, they're not. Actually, most of them are advocates. They're good people that are there to represent their community. I try to stay away from taking the lead on some of the social issues because, quite frankly, there's enough people jumping up to the top for that. I try to focus on what I call kitchen table issues.
Kitchen table. Well, then that is very good. And I think, are you going to be running for a 4th term? Is that something we
I
can
am,
ask you?
yeah,
Or-
yeah, no. This is the time of year you like to know those
Okay,
things. yeah.
okay.
No, I have every intention. We'll be getting ready to get out in the streets in the 2nd week of June or 1st week of June with petitions, and hopefully we'll have a successful election.
All right. Well, thank you, Assemblyman McDonald, for being here, and we'll see you next time on Legislative Update.
Thanks, Joe.